many friends, supporters, collaborators, and partners in India's journey in India's journey with the world, on how India and the world should respond to the new and emerging disruptions that are reshaping the global order. India's role in that over the next 25 years and more, as India looks to her 100th and further, is going to be important and crucial. But the nature and shape of that role is one that requires us both to reflect on our past as well as to understand our present. To debate and discuss these issues, it's an absolute privilege for us to have you here, sir. Thank you so much, Excellency, for taking the time to join us on this important occasion. It is indeed for CPR such a privilege to host you as part of this series. I'll now hand over to Ambassador Shyam Saran, who is a member of the Center for Policy Research's governing board, to take us through the proceedings for today. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Yamini, and let me join you in extending a very, very warm welcome to Dr. Mohamed ElBaradei, former Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency. By the way, he's still Director General Emeritus of the IAEA. So his association with the agency continues. For me, it is a particular pleasure because I will be dated if I say that, because in the early years of the 1980s, I had the privilege of working together with His Excellency as somewhat younger diplomats at the Committee on Disarmament in Geneva. And we worked actually very closely together. We were part of what was then known as the Group of 21 of non-aligned and neutral countries. And it was a very close and friendly association that I had, not only with His Excellency, but also there were other very eminent members of the Egyptian delegation, Nabil Fahmy, who later became foreign minister, and who has also, by the way, participated in these series. I will just give a short introduction to His Excellency. He does not need much of an introduction, but still, I think it would be worthwhile for me to just perhaps point to some landmarks in his very illustrious career. As you have heard, that he has been for several years the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency. He began his career with the Egyptian Diplomatic Service in 1964. He was serving in the permanent missions of Egypt to the United Nations in New York, but also, as I mentioned, in Geneva. And his particular forte was the legal field, in which he did a considerable amount of work. And from 1974 to 1978, he was special assistant and legal advisor to the foreign minister of Egypt. It was in 1980 that he left the Egyptian diplomatic service to then join the United Nations. I would like to also mention that Dr. Mohamed ElBaradei was awarded the Nobel Prize along with his agency, the International Atomic Energy Agency, in October 2005. And more important from the Indian perspective is that he is also a recipient of the Indira Gandhi Prize for Peace, Disarmament and Development. So again, a very close association with India. And I would like to finally mention that one of the major landmark agreements, the negotiation of which I was a participant, which is the Indo-US nuclear deal, which took some time for us to conclude. But one very important pillar of that agreement was, in fact, our ability to get an endorsement, in a sense, from the IAEA. And it is there that Dr. ElBaradei played an absolutely critical role from our point of view. I think it would have been very difficult for us to get this agreement through if we did not have the consistent support and sympathy of the Director General of the IAEA. Because it was really, without any exaggeration, I would say that India really owes a great deal to him for the conclusion of this agreement. Let me not dwell further on what is not only a very illustrious career, but from the point of view of India, someone who has been a great friend of our country. So it is very appropriate that today we have called upon him to deliver this lecture to mark the 75th anniversary of India's independence, and to just hear his views of his personal association with India, with the many years in which he has had to he has dealt with India, has worked together with India, and also from his perspective, what does he see the future? I mean, what kind of role do you think that India could play, whether it is on the issue of disarmament, and also going back to our work together in the Committee on Disarmament? Is there a new Cold War which is perhaps descending upon us? Some people are saying, oh, should we not be looking at non-alignment again? These are some of the questions perhaps that we can take up later. So let me now please request our guest, Excellency Mohamed ElBaradei, to please deliver his lecture. Thank you very much for your attention.
Ms. Iyer, Foreign Secretary Serum, it's a great pleasure, personally great pleasure, to be with you today and to have this kind introduction by both of you. I'm coming home speaking to my Indian friends. And it's really an honor to speak before such a discerning group on the occasion of the 75th anniversary of India's independence. My remarks here today are totally personal reflections about a country I admire, a culture I value, and a friendship I cherish. I was fascinated growing up by this frail, thinly clad man who was able, through nonviolent resistance, to wrench his country's independence from the colonial Raj. I was too young to fully appreciate the extent of his enormous influence on millions across the globe, yearning, craving for freedom and equality. It was during my first posting abroad at the Egyptian mission to the United Nations in New York that my long, close, and wide-ranging association with India and its people and culture began. Diplomats, scientists, scholars, business people, artists, and policymakers. Ambassador G. Parthasarathi, GP, as you call him, articulate speeches in the Security Council during the Arab-Israeli War in 1967, and S.K. Singh fluency and energy addressing the UN Budgetary Committee left a lasting impression on me as a young diplomat, as have the films of the brilliant Satyajit Ray, who introduced me to the depths, complexity, and humanism of the Indian culture with beautifully artistic simplicity. It was decades later I received the Indira Gandhi's Prize for Peace and Development, a prize very dear to my heart. Had lunch with Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, a man I greatly respect, and who is, to me, a personification of Indian humility. But perhaps the most treasured memories are of my Indian friends and colleagues. From my host, Shyam Saran, with whom, as he mentioned, we worked in Geneva on this disarmament agenda as very young diplomats, To my close colleagues at the IAEA, including Shil Sharma, all of whom went and my golf partner is Srinivasan, alas, has a much better hand than I. To my outstanding parts, Atomic Energy Commission who introduced me to the vegetarian and Anil Kakot the way to my dialogue with Professor Raj Gandhi in Cairo. 2011. Our quest for the 2018 to Sunday on the Normandy Manifesto for World Peace. Throughout all these rich interactions, we had spirited discussions, agreed and disagreed, but camaraderie and mutual respect remained constant. I could continue down memory lane, but I need to stop and go to the subject of my talk. Nehru had a vision of a modern India: secularism, non-violence, parliamentary democracy, national unity within diversity, socialism and economic self-reliance, and emphasis on science and technology. Non-alignment with India's foreign policy. In 1962, Nehru said that he was, quote, very proud of India and of the many things that India has given to humanity. I think those are things of the greatest value to humanity. And I do believe humanity will yet profit by them, he added. While I certainly agree fully with Nehru on the past and potential role of India, I believe some of the things of the greatest value that India could bring to humanity today, at a time when the global order is challenged and upended, are centered in three key areas: peace and security, governance and democracy, and economic and social development. Nehru, in line with Gandhi's philosophy of nonviolence, was an early advocate of nuclear disarmament. In 1954, he was the first to call for a halt to nuclear testing. In 1962, at an anti-nuclear arms convention conference in New Delhi, he reflected on the difficulty and complexity of nuclear disarmament. Same as Bertrand Russell and Albert Einstein in their 1955 manifesto, Nehru understood that nuclear weapons were, quote, part of a larger thing, abolishing war, requiring something deeper, the minds and hearts of men and the spirit of man rising to somewhat higher levels, unquote. And we must have full disarmament, all connected. In June 1988, Rajiv Gandhi, Prime Minister, presented to the United Nations General Assembly what is still a comprehensive action plan for nuclear weapons-free and non-violent world order. which sought a universal, comprehensive, and legally binding commitment to a staged elimination of nuclear weapons within a defined time frame, 2010 at the latest, and the establishment of a comprehensive global security system firmly based on nonviolence. In his speech, Rajiv Gandhi was extremely critical of the doctrine of nuclear deterrence, the doctrine we still live under. He described it as the ultimate expression of the philosophy of terrorism, holding humanity hostage to the presumed security needs of a few. Unquote. Much later, much water naturally has gone under the bridge since then, notably India's development of nuclear weapons in 1998. This was due, I believe, to a number of global and regional geopolitical considerations, including the stagnant nature of nuclear disarmament by the weapon states and the restrictive nuclear trade policy it faced as a non-NPT party. India remains today a non-member of the Nuclear Supplier Group, NSG. But in 2008, it was granted access to civilian nuclear technology and fuel through a waiver exempting it from NSG rules, a measure I supported as a Director General of the IAEA, considering India's energy needs and the importance of nuclear safety and international cooperation. And frankly, at that time, India was not in violation of any legal norms. Sadly, the prospect of for nuclear disarmament does not look bright. A quarter of a century after the end of the Cold War, we still have little under 13,000 nuclear weapons in existence, 13,000, with around 2,000 of them on high alert or prompt launch, as they call it. In addition, most, if not all, the 9 nuclear armed states, the 5 NPT states, China, France, Russia, UK, US, plus India, Israel, Pakistan, and DPRK, all 9 of them are in a race to modernize their arsenals. More ominously, many of them are developing so-called tactical, usable nuclear weapons and availing themselves of new cyber and artificial intelligence technologies, as well as advanced sci-fi hypersonic missiles that can trigger a nuclear catastrophe at a speed we cannot even imagine. All this, of course, increases the danger of a nuclear weapons launch, whether intentionally, accidentally, as a result of cyber manipulation, which is becoming more and more dangerous, as I see, or simply as an act of madness, as President Kennedy feared. One of the most disturbing developments of the Ukrainian war has been the reintroduction of nuclear weapons as a central component of geopolitics, shifting the possible use of nuclear weapons from an unthinkable nightmare to a terrifying prospect. Given India's long history of serious commitment to a world free from nuclear weapons, I believe it still shoulders a certain moral responsibility to lead the charge among the nuclear armed states and across the world towards nuclear disarmament. It should demonstrate through tangible measures that its acquisition of nuclear weapons was an interim step, not a permanent policy, and that its ultimate commitment to a world free from nuclear weapons remains unwavering. As Nehru and Rajiv Gandhi pointed out, however, this should be linked to and in parallel with an effort to establish a new global security architecture based on nonviolence. Today, our global security architecture is in disarray, and international relations have become much more weaponized, quote unquote, than during Rajiv Gandhi's time. The Security Council, entrusted with the maintenance of international peace and security, has become pitifully impotent. Ukraine, again, is the latest tragic case in point. The global order has become paralyzed and polarized, and our world remains marred by poverty, violence, repression, and obscene inequality. Over 700 million people live in extreme poverty, with nearly half the world population struggling to meet basic needs. And it is getting worse, as we know, because of COVID and the war and many other things. Brutal repression and denial of human dignity are hallmarks of 1/3 of the world nations. We spend less than 1% of what we spent on armament, which this year is $2 trillion on humanitarian assistance. And that's what says it all. Inequality even extends to a cardinal human value, the sanctity of life. This was recently laid bare by COVID-19, the Ukraine war, and the treatment of refugees. 83% of EU and EU have been fully vaccinated, but only 15%. The world is strongly, as it should be, to the war, but it has to hand-wringing when hundreds of thousands of civilians were killed or died from hunger in Syria, Yemen, Somalia, and other places. And while refugees from Ukraine are met with open arms as one of us, those from Africa and Asia escaping death and persecution are left to drown or placed in appalling detention camps. We often repeat the mantra that we should build back better. I believe we need to build a completely new global peace and security structure based on freedom, equity, and nonviolence. Many people, myself included, look to India's active contribution in this field. Let me turn to governance and democracy. Pluralistic and secular democracy in the world have always been the proverbial answer to the skeptics who question whether democracy can work in a developing country, and if it is compatible with poverty, illiteracy, and other challenges. There is often a semi-philosophical comparison between the Indian model and the Chinese model. Specifically, whether one ought to prioritize economic and social rights, or whether human development and human dignity should be approached as an indivisible whole, including, of course, civil and political rights. Countries who opted for democratic systems are aware that democracy is not one size fits all, nor is it instant coffee. It's the product of each country's historical, social, and political evolution. Democracy is always a work in progress in terms of its culture, institution, and modalities. It has its flaws and is often slow and messy. And as we know, it is fragile and vulnerable to manipulation and abuse. But with all these caveats, a democratic system is still, to my mind, a political system humanity has come up with. It is aligned with people's innate aspiration for freedom, dignity, and equality. It is anchored in transparency and accountability. It advocates for inclusiveness, diversity, and equity. Then judicial protect the minority. Rule. Religious, ethnic, ideological are all key values for cohesion and stability. More so in a country like India, with such a diverse ethnic, cultural, religious, and linguistic background. Democracy is now under vicious attack by populism and authoritarianism due to the failure of many democracies to deliver on people growing economic and social expectations. A failure coupled in many places by gross economic and social inequality. Here I also believe that India, as a primus inter pares of democracies in the global South, has a moral calling to show the world that democracy and economic and social development are not only compatible, but also reinforce each other. There's a symbiotic nature between the two. And that the challenge to democracy should be met with more democracy, not less. India ought to demonstrate through words and action that democracy remains the best underwriter of equality, accountability, and human dignity, maintaining its long-held principle of secularism. It was the poor, uneducated Indian women, after all, who succeeded in the past through the democratic process to bring down governments which did not fill their aspiration for development and equality. The recent and recurrent pattern of hate speech and acts of religious intolerance against the Muslim minority, as well as the communal violence and riots that ensued, are deeply regrettable, should not be tolerated, and must be sternly confronted. The close and historic ties between India and the Muslim world are too valuable and strategic to be left to go down a slippery slope. I believe an urgent dialogue is needed between all parties to explore means of creating an environment conducive to social cohesion and safeguarding against prejudice and discrimination. The healing should begin by talking to each other instead of talking at each other. The Indian established model of out of many, one is too precious to be compromised. India still faces huge economic and social challenges despite recent strides. A few years back, I had a discussion with Amartya Sen. He explained to me that the three key elements that contributed most to economic and social development in countries with varied political systems, such as Singapore and Japan, were quality education, good healthcare system, and policies of social tolerance. India has given special attention to education ever since independence, although there are still many unfulfilled expectations. One of the far-sighted decisions was the establishment of first-class scientific educational institutions, such as the Indian Institutes of Technology, some 23 of them located across the country. They were rightfully named institutes of national importance by an act of parliament as far back as 1961. When one looks at the number of CEOs of major US tech companies of Indian origin, one realizes how forward-thinking India was at a time when the term information technology was barely known. Information technology in India accounted for 8% of India's GDP in 2020. With technology considered the fourth industrial revolution and AI and supercomputers the future, India is well placed in the field of science and technology to establish itself as an important hub and a Mecca for the global South. It has many comparative advantages. In the health sector, the Serum Institute of India, the world's largest vaccine manufacturer, has become, for the last 3 years, the principal supplier of affordable COVID-19 vaccine for low and middle-income countries, and one of the backbones of efforts by WHO and others to cope with vaccine apartheid and protect the health of the poor. This is something you should be proud of and build upon. Having spent most of my career dealing with international relations, it would be amiss not to refer to the kind of foreign policy that India, in my view, should pursue as a major voice of global South. During the Cold War, India was a champion of the non-aligned movement. It took part in the 1955 Bandung Conference. This was the precursor of the establishment in 1961 of the non-aligned movement through the initiative of Yugoslavia, India, Egypt, Ghana, and Indonesia. Although the movement now has 120 members, it has lost much of its clout and luster. Since 2003, India has been a founding member of the IPSA Dialogue Forum, India, Brazil, South Africa, established as a tripartite grouping of important democracies of the South to promote South-South cooperation. And since 2010, India has been a member of BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, as the world's 5 leading emerging market economies. Last year, India also had joined the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, Quad, with Australia, Japan, and the US. Quad commits itself to a free, open, and inclusive Indo-Pacific region, and is regarded by many as an effort to counterbalance China's role and influence in the region. The global order is changing fast. The bipolar world has expired and is morphing into a multipolar one whose shape and precise constellation are still not very much defined. Given India's size, culture, demographic, and economic clout, it will certainly be one of the principal players. There are a number of questions on people's minds related to India's foreign policy that no doubt will be clarified along the way. Is India going to be aligned with any of the existing poles as being a member of Quad and a participant in military exercises with the US and its regional allies might imply? Is India going to maintain its long-held independence as its vote in the UN on the Russian-Ukraine war suggests? And if so, what are the basic principles, values, and laws that are going to inform its policy choices? And how will it strike the delicate balance every country has to do between its basic values and national interest? While it is often tempting, in my view, for states to look at their short-term national interest, it is essential not to lose sight of the long-term pillars of the international order, such as the non-use of force and the non-acquisition of territory by war. In many cases, this results in winning the battle for some, but losing the war for all of us, forfeiting collective peace and security. Another question is whether India aims to be a stand-alone pole. And if so, would it continue to be closely associated with the large democracies in the South, as well as with other South constellation, for example, the non-aligned movement and G77? These are some of the questions I think people think about. I strongly believe that today's chaotic global order would be well served by an India that is key spokesman for the hurt and the hope of the global South. In a global environment overshadowed by an inordinate dose of toxic nationalism, India can be an example of people's quest for a pluralistic, inclusive, and nonviolent world. I have long believed and said so that India ought to be a permanent member of the Security Council. But until that happens, India should continue to speak up loud and clear on major issues that shape and affect our future. I recently told an American friend that I'm giving a lecture on the role of India in our world today. His immediate response was, India should be a city upon a hill. What he meant was that he hoped that it can and ought to be a model for some of the best human values. I cannot agree more. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Excellency. That was both a very moving and a presentation with tremendous insights, which also reflects your deep engagement with our country over a long period of time. We will just have a short conversation, and if there are other comments or questions, I will pose them to you. But I just wanted to reflect on 2 or 3 issues that you raised. One, of course, is that having for many years, India having actually been one of the champions of nuclear disarmament, having been, as you said, one of the early champions of comprehensive test ban, treaty. Well, how is it that India then, after decrying, nuclear deterrence, finally ended up by, in fact, espousing nuclear deterrence itself? And you very rightly pointed out that there were a number of different, circumstances and situations that led us in that direction. But I would also like to just mention here that in taking that step in 1998, one important declaration by India was that it remained convinced that a world which is free of nuclear weapons will enhance India's security more than a world in which there are countries with nuclear weapons. So that commitment is very clear, that we see our security enhanced by a world free of nuclear weapons rather than a world in which nuclear weapons are deployed. So I think that's an important aspect, and the fact that, of course, we are committed to a non-first use of nuclear weapons. But it is certainly true that the progress towards nuclear disarmament has really been very, very slow, if at all. And in this context, I wanted to ask you, Excellency, you are aware of the fact that a number of countries came together, non-aligned and neutral countries as well, which actually concluded a treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. And in fact, the first anniversary of that particular treaty is going to be celebrated very soon. There will be the first conference of the states parties to that particular treaty. And in the context that you mentioned, the resurgence of concern over the use of nuclear weapons, particularly in the context of the Ukraine war. Do you think that this particular initiative, which after all represents the viewpoint of a fairly large number of countries, yes, non-nuclear weapon countries, is this something that can be taken forward? Because after all, in a sense, many years ago, this is precisely the sort of thing that we fought for as Egypt and India. So that was my question to you. What do you think is the way in which this perhaps initiative can be given some encouragement?
Thank you very much, Ambassador Sarin. You are absolutely right on India's record, and I fully understand and agree that you had, until you developed a nuclear weapon, a stellar record of fighting for disarmament, nuclear disarmament, and you continue to believe that nuclear disarmament is the way. What I meant that you shouldn't stop there, that even after you develop nuclear weapon, you should be at the forefront. Right now, it's very scary what we hear, as I mentioned right now, that use of nuclear weapon, tactical or whatever, is possible. Right? Everybody knows that once you use nuclear weapon, that's the end of it. That there is no small or large nuclear weapon. That's the end of it. I think that the ban treaty grew out, which was signed or concluded by 122 countries. So it's a large chunk of the human population. of the space, not even a snail right now. And their message is that nuclear weapons are awful, destructive, cannot be used, and therefore we should ban it the same we banned chemical and biological weapons. So I don't see it to be something out of the ordinary. In the case of the chemical and biological, we banned and eliminated, and why can't we do the same with nuclear weapons? Unfortunately, the attitude of the weapon states, a member of NATO and other, were quite negative to the ban treaty. I mean, 3 of the weapon states, I think it was the US, Russia, the US, France, and England, UK, said we will never be able to be party to that treaty. I mean, it's awful, wasn't really not appropriate statement. You can say, I understand, let us work together, but to say this is absolutely out of the question, it's not really the great thing. The first meeting of the parties is going to take place actually next Tuesday here in Vienna. And on Monday, there is a conference on the humanitarian
consequences of nuclear,
which I talk at least I mean, they asked to say a few words at the conference. So I'm feeling that, and I've been saying, if I agree it's not going to happen overnight, it would be good to talk to the other camp. I mean, I don't see, frankly, why some states or allied to the weapon state not attend that first meeting as observers. Why can't India, for example, go as observer? Listen, there's nothing, wrong. I think it will send a very positive message. I know that from my Austrian colleagues who are organizing the conference. That I also know, that some of the NATO members are coming, in fact, as observer. It would be, in my view, personal view, that it would be great if India could come as an observer, make a statement, express its views, how your commitment to nuclear armament, how it would go, blah, blah. So it really is important to continue the dialogue. That's what I think. What as I said, as a friend, I personally would advise.
No, thank you, Excellency. I think as a friend, you have given us very wise advice, and that is, I hope that people in our government will listen to the advice that you have given. Yes, I also think that the attitude of the US, UK, and France is not really very positive, for the simple reason that just before the review conference of the Non-Proliferation Treaty was going to be held some time back, and it was postponed because of the COVID. They actually, the 5 nuclear weapon states parties to the NPT did make a statement that a nuclear war can never be fought, can be never won. And that means that you should get rid of nuclear weapons sooner rather than later. Exactly. And also, it is their commitment under Article 6 of the NPT.
Exactly.
There is a commitment to, in fact, nuclear disarmament. So in terms of even the commitments that they have voluntarily assumed, I think it is something that they should be doing. The second point that I was very much impressed by was your focus on democracy, and that this is something which amongst the different dispensations, political dispensations that we have, even if there are certain shortcomings, but this is probably the best that we can possibly hope for in terms of the possibility that it gives for personal individual development, the creating a environment in which people can rise to their full potential. The fact that this is one system which allows for accountability of governments, which is a very important factor. So in that respect, of course, again, despite all its shortcomings, India has been somewhat unique in having maintained this political dispensation. Not that there have not been challenges in the past, and not to say that there are no challenges today. But I do feel that there is in India. We have been through phases where we have had these kind of setbacks, and yet we have been able to, reassert the democratic, principle in our country. What you have mentioned about secularism is a particularly important aspect, and yes, we are disturbed by what has happened recently, but I think it is also perhaps encouraging that the Indian state has taken very quick action to try and contain the damage that it could do, and I would hope that we can get back to the very strong relationship and very strong mutual understanding that we have been able to establish with the particularly the countries in the Gulf and other countries, Muslim countries. This has been one of the success stories of this government, that it has actually been able to establish very close relations and relations of very, I mean, the Prime Minister himself, as you know, has been awarded, the highest state honors by some of the countries. So there is a strong bond between India and these countries. And I certainly believe that despite what has happened, we would be able to get back on track as far as those relationships are concerned. With regard to secularism within India itself, I certainly believe that one of the greatest strengths of India is precisely its ability to manage what is absolutely incredible, plurality, incredible diversity. I think if there is one reason why India's case should be perhaps a lesson to the rest of the world, it is precisely, I think, that ability to really handle plurality. And I believe that that particular quality is especially relevant today when we are living in a very globalized world, where the kind of intense interconnections exist now amongst all our countries on our people. So whichever country is able to actually handle plurality is probably going to be able to handle globalization perhaps much better than others. So in that respect, I also feel somewhat optimistic about the future. And I was very happy to see that you also believe that even though we are living in a very complex world, and a world which is changing so rapidly, there is still, in fact, a constructive role that India could play going forward. And the last point I would perhaps like to address is, where does India stand today? You mentioned the fact that India is a part of Quad. So is it veering towards alliance? But India is also a part of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. It is also, a member of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, the BRICS Development Bank. So it appears to me that today India is, has developed a network of relationships of different kinds, and it is mainly because India's interests today, I think, are very wide spectrum in nature. It cannot be, those interests cannot be perhaps, delivered upon only through certain, limited partnerships. You need to have issue-based, coalitions. And I think our effort at least has been to try and build up those interest-based coalitions. And in that respect, I think we have done not too badly. And you mentioned the Indian stand on the Ukraine war. I think it reflects that we are very uncomfortable with the violation of territorial integrity and sovereignty of an independent country. There are no two doubts about that. We are very uncomfortable with the kind of human rights violations and violence that is taking place. And we would like this to end as quickly as possible. But we also believe that, perhaps taking a condemnatory tone publicly on this issue may not really contribute very much to the solution of this problem. And I think we have had this kind of a stance even in the past. But having said that, let me come back as the last question to you. Come back to you to ask, with the kind of situation that we are facing today, and I said, is there an incipient Cold War which is in the offing? You know, are we going to see Russia and China on one side and the US and the NATO countries on the other side? Is there perhaps a certain kind of logic of revival of something like the non-aligned movement? Is this something that we should be thinking of? Is this something that India should be thinking of in terms of, you know, where it positions itself going forward? This is something which, since we have also worked together, you know, as I mentioned, in a very active capacity as non-aligned and neutral countries, is there some space for something like that again?
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador Sarum. Let me say that India has always been a model for many of us. A model of a country with all its challenges has managed to work through a democratic system. Democracy means freedom, means human dignity. Lots of problems, but there is a way out of it through democracy. And I think what I am basically saying, hang in there, because you are very important for, not just for India, for many of us in the South who look at you, and everybody who said democracy cannot work in the South because we are poor, we are. My answer has always been throughout my life, look at India. So hang in there. And I know the challenges, but the challenges has to be dealt with more democracy, with more inclusiveness. I think secularism is really a key. I mean, I can tell you, one of the major problems we see in the Muslim world is how we manage the relationship between government and religion. You know, this has been still a major issue. Where does religion come, and where is the secular law comes? I mean, that we never able to disentangle that. And that, I think, has been until today a major issue. So for me, when I look about secularism, I look at secularism as meaning, you know, give what is for God to God, give what is, you know, for Caesar to Caesar. You know, that's basically what the, but on the other hand, you are now, as I mentioned, India, because of whatever, you have always developed as a country based on beautiful values: peace, non-violence, you know, equity, openness. Hinduism is that the world is open, is the world is one, you know, and I think that's what we need today. That is, there is, as I keep saying, a moral calling, a moral responsibility. When the world, as we see it today, completely, you know, getting back into, you know, allies, you know, China, the US. I saw the Shanghai statement by the Defense Secretary of the US. Frankly, I was not really thrilled to listen to it. I mean, it's more saying we are divided, and that's not where we should be. We are united. That's what we should really look into, how we get together. And in this war, you know, the only solution, no matter what you do, is that the parties should talk to each other, should sit together. There is no way out of it. You know, you cannot fight for until, you know, the end of life. We still at one point, and the earlier we get to talk to each other, the less human suffering we will have. So I think, as I mentioned, India is triumph inter pares among the South. You know, thus the injustice committed again in the South, against you, against just about everybody, is so horrible. And there is a lot, when I said you are the spokesman, and you should be the spokesman for the South hurt and the South hope. Yeah, there's a lot of hope we still would like to see. So I believe that yes, the G77 or the non-aligned, but should be revitalized. It has now lost a lot of clout and luster, as I mentioned, and it should really be refocused. It should be now talking about how we save our world, how we first make sure that we don't use weapons of mass destruction, how we re-engineer the multinational system. The UN right now is not there. How we make sure that we focus on cooperation, whether it's China, whether it's Russia, whether it's India. We need to focus on cooperation. There is no other way than cooperation. We are too entangled together right now that to try to disentangle ourselves is madness. So my personal feeling, and that's very personal, you like it or not, you are a polar on your own. You are a polar on your own. But it's a polar that has to make sure that you are not only speaking on your behalf, but at the very least, speak on behalf of the global South, and then help in the process of re-engineering our global, not just security architecture, but way of life. When Gandhi said, peace is the path, there is no path, peace is the path. I think that's correct. Non-violence, dialogue, equity, equality and these are all these are very values. They come from India. They're they are part of your culture. And what you need to do, is spread the gospel. Spread the gospel.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't know whether we will be able to spread the gospel, but I think you are right. India has to stand something more than itself. That I think is very very important. Dr. ElBaradei, if you'll give me just a few minutes, because there are a couple of questions which I wanted to, on behalf of those who have been listening to you very patiently for the last hour or so. There is one question from Dr. Bhaskar Balakrishnan, who also has been someone who has served in Geneva and is very familiar with disarmament related issues. He asks whether you think that declarations, bilateral or plurilateral, on the non-first use of nuclear weapons, is this something that may be useful in terms of the whole nuclear disarmament process?
Yeah, I believe as much guarantees you give to the rest of the world about non-first use, is very important. People have become very cynical, to be open, to be frank. People don't believe in any commitment, guarantees, negative assurance. But I think if all the weapon states make a solemn commitment, a believable commitment, that nuclear weapon, no matter what, will not be used first. When Russia said we can still use it if our very existence is threatened, well, I don't think that, if Russia can do that, every other country can say the same. We need to protect our very existence. So we need, I think, working on non-first use at least at the beginning, and not just a weapon state, with the others, with the non-first state. What can we do to give you that, until we reach disarmament, that these weapons will not be used, But it's a part of a process. You cannot just talk about it alone. You have to talk about it in the context of cooperation, dialogue, trust building, and not just not nuclear weapon. Nuclear weapon is just of our fear, reflect our fear, and doesn't reflect our trust in each other. But yes, we need to talk about it. I saw China a couple of days ago mentioned that we'll never use first nuclear weapon under any circumstances. I think everybody should repeat that. I think a collective statement by all the weapon states, the 9 of them, I would even dare to say the 9 of them, including North Korea, we should get a statement saying we are there. We are not in the best situation, and we need to move forward, and let us at least commit ourselves to non-first use.
Yeah. And very last question, Dr. Baradei. One of the very major issues, confronting the world is, everyone is waiting with bated breath whether the Iran nuclear deal will be revived again. Negotiations have been taking place for quite some time. And yet, we don't seem to be able to cover the last mile, as it were, in trying to revive it. And you will agree that the revival of that agreement would be a very major contribution to, in fact, bringing down some of the tensions that are there in international relations. In looking at where we are at this point of time with the JCPOA, what is your view? I mean, is this something which we should now perhaps abandon hope that something will happen, or is there still some traction left in terms of the revival of the deal?
The irony that both parties, the US and Iran, very much want the agreement to come back into force. I mean, it's a domestic politics that is now, as I understand, having a hurdle. The question is whether to have the whatever you call it in Iran, as part of terrorists, it's not the national what is it, the militias or national force or whatever. It's
the Revolutionary Guards.
Yeah, the Revolutionary Guard. Sorry. Yeah, it's whether the Revolutionary Guard should be part of on the terrorist list. That is not part of the agreement. Let us have. I mean, I was so happy to have this agreement. I still believe that the way to resolve the Iranian issue is through dialogues, gradual agreement, building trust, and not sanction. Sanction doesn't work. Sanction, in fact, makes things even worse. Let us have the agreement. Let us put all the other issues. I know there is a lot of other concern and issues, Iran activities in the region, the National Guard, but let's at least have the agreement, sign the agreement, get the agreement in place, and then continue the dialogue. And this is, again, maybe, as I say, maybe India or some other non-participant in this, dialogue right now, chip in some ideas, or basically saying, we do believe in the agreement, we need the agreement, and we are ready to mediate. As far as I understand, all the technical issues are in place. It's just a question now is, can the US conclude the agreement and then they have a midterm election? Can the Iran conclude the agreement with the National Guard, part of terrorism? But this is, let us separate domestic politics, let us from a major security issue. I mean, I shudder to think how the Middle East would look like if this thing will fall apart, But again, in this area, I think they need an interlocuteur valable. They need somebody from outside to tell them, put their heads together and bash them together, and saying, you are not the world. What you are doing has a lot of impact on the rest of the world. And we need an agreement, and we are ready to help. So I think now, again, if we can lead, or some of you, maybe some from Latin America, whatever you can think of, a group of friends, as you remember, always at the UN have this group of friends or whatever. Some friends can help the two parties get together. In a compromise, they will come shouting and screaming, but at least let them sign.
Thank you very much. Yes, well, the Iranian foreign minister was recently in Delhi, and I'm not very sure whether this particular issue was discussed, but you are right. Perhaps there are a certain amount of nudging from friends is required at this point of time. Well, Dr. ElBaradei, it has been absolutely an incredible experience for all of us to have the kind of very deep insights you have been able to offer us during the last 1 hour or so. This is really a moment for India. In a sense, we are also at a crossroads, in a world that is changing so rapidly. Whatever intervention you try to do, it's like shooting at a moving target all the time. So in that sense, we are living in a very complex international environment. And, in this kind of situation, to have, advice from friends like you who have had long engagement with India, sometimes it is always better. We are so inward looking in a sense sometimes. It is very good to have a friend, who has perhaps been more familiar with us than we are with ourselves, to really give us these very valuable insights in terms of, what India's record has been, and what may be the pitfalls as we go forward. But most importantly, your message that, India should remain true to itself, in a sense. That is not only important, this is not only important for India, but for a large number of countries, really. What India does, in a sense, they take the cue from India. So this is something we perhaps do not always appreciate. So thank you for reminding us of where we are. And we once again, on behalf of the Center for Policy Research and all the participants in this event, thank you very much for spending time with us, and we wish you all the very best going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, and thank you very much, Ms. Iyer. It has been a really pleasure for me to be with you, and just to think together as friends. I think I would like just to end by saying what we have today is a clash of values in the world. If you are a repository of values, and don't be stingy. Share it with others.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Okay, Yamini, shall we say bye-bye now?
Yes, yeah. Thank you. On behalf of CPR, thank you very much. It's been an absolute privilege. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much to all the friends who have been participating in this event. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks. Thank you. Pleasure.